There's something sacred about the quiet routines you build with someone you love. For me and Noah, it was the little things. The soft shuffle of his feet on the kitchen floor, the way he always kissed my shoulder before leaving for work, his habit of humming the same tune when he was nervous but trying to hide it. 8 years of marriage had settled into something steady, something safe. Not perfect, not thrilling, but warm, real. I never once thought that kind of life could vanish in a single moment. It was just past 2 in the morning when the phone rang. I knew before I picked it up that something was wrong. You don't forget the sound of those calls, the cold, practiced tone of a nurse saying your husband's been in a car accident. He was stable, unconscious. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I moved like I'd done it all before, coat, purse, keys, and drove through streets I barely saw, just following the red taillights ahead of me, willing myself to hold it together. They said the word coma, like it was just another clinical term, like fever or sprain. But it didn't feel that way when I saw him. Tubes, wires, machines breathing for him. I sat by his bed every day telling him stories, our stories, even though his eyes stayed closed. I brought in photos, played our wedding song through my phone speaker, told him about the time he burned the Thanksgiving turkey trying to impress my mom. I thought if I filled the room with enough love, he'd find his way back to me. And in a way, he did. His eyes fluttered open 3 days later, and for one split second I thought, there you are. But when he looked at me, it was like I was a stranger he'd passed on the street. Who are you? He asked. Just like that. 3 words that split me wide open. The nurses had warned me this might happen. Still, nothing prepares you to be erased by someone who once knew your soul by heart. The first few days after he woke up were surreal. I kept smiling like it didn't hurt, like it didn't feel like I'd been hollowed out from the inside. Every time he looked at me with that distant, polite expression, like a nurse or a bank teller, it took everything in me not to fall apart. I told myself it wasn't personal. It was just the trauma. The doctors were hopeful. Memories can come back in pieces, they said. But what if the piece with me never returned? I started small. Photo albums, little stories. I showed him the one where we're standing by the lake, the day we adopted our dog, Charlie. He smiled, but there was no flicker of recognition. Just kindness. And that was somehow worse. I would have preferred confusion, even fear, something real. But what I got was a stranger trying to be gentle with my grief. He didn't remember me, but he could see that I remembered him, and maybe that was enough for now. One afternoon, I took him to the little cafe we used to go to every Sunday. He ordered a tea. He always hated tea. I didn't correct him. I just watched him sip it with that same blank expression. It was like watching a ghost go through the motions of someone I used to know. I tried so hard to act normal, to smile, to keep my hands from trembling as I reached for his. His fingers didn't pull away, but they didn't tighten around mine either. I'd go home at night and lie awake staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. Our last conversation. His last text. What were we even talking about that night before the crash? I kept thinking, maybe I missed something. Maybe there was a sign. I tried to push that voice down, the one that whispered, what if this is permanent? But hope is funny. It clings to the tiniest things. The way he tilted his head when I laughed. The way he hesitated before saying my name. The hardest part wasn't the memory loss. It was the emptiness behind his eyes when he looked at me, like the echo of a house that used to be filled with music. I kept telling myself this was just a beginning, not an end, that I had the chance to make him fall in love with me again. And wasn't that what people dreamed of? A fresh start? But the truth is, I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to carry us both, the memory of who we were and the weight of who he'd become. He started asking me questions, soft ones at first, about our wedding, our home, my favorite color, then more personal. Did I ever make you cry? Were we happy? I answered with a smile, but my heart cracked a little each time. Because yes, we were happy, and yes, sometimes he did make me cry. But how do you explain years of love in sound bites? How do you rebuild a life brick by brick when one of you doesn't remember ever laying the foundation? I watched him try, though. That's what kept me going. The way he studied our photos like they were clues. The way he leaned in when I told him stories, as if willing himself to believe they belonged to him. And slowly, things shifted. He started remembering tiny things. A song, the way he liked his eggs, the joke he always made about my terrible singing. It was fragile, like smoke. But it was something. A thread I could follow. A thread I had to follow. I didn't know it then, but that thread would lead me somewhere I never expected. Because the man who came back to me wasn't the man I married. Not really. He was softer, sweeter, more present. And as I stood at the edge of this strange, beautiful, terrifying second chance, I couldn't help but wonder, if he'd forgotten everything, what else had he left behind? At first, I thought it was just part of the recovery. The occasional blank stare, the confusion when we walked past familiar places. I told myself it was normal. Healing isn't linear. But then there were little things. Things that didn't line up, like the keys on his keychain. One was labeled Unit 7B. We live in a house. Always have. When I asked about it, he just shrugged and said maybe it was from work. But Noah never labeled his keys. Ever. That wasn't like him. Then I found the business card, stuffed into the back of his wallet like it had been forgotten or hidden. It had a woman's name on it, and a number with an area code from another state. When I asked who she was, he blinked at it, then at me, like I'd just handed him a puzzle with half the pieces missing. I don't know, he said, and maybe he didn't. Maybe that was the scariest part, that even he didn't know what parts of him were missing. Something in me shifted that day. I stopped just playing nurse and started playing detective. I told myself it was to protect him, to fill in the gaps with truth. But deep down, I think I knew I was about to find something I didn't want to see. I waited until he was asleep, breathing steady beside me, and I searched through the drawer where he kept his things. That's when I saw it, a second phone, jammed under a pile of receipts and old sunglasses. It was locked, of course, a different model than his main one. It didn't buzz, didn't ring. I held it in my hand like it was some strange, living thing. My heart was pounding, even though I hadn't done anything yet. It wasn't like him to keep secrets. At least, the Noah I remembered didn't. But this version had a past I couldn't see. And for the first time since the accident, I wasn't sure I wanted to. It took me 3 nights to crack the password. I started with the obvious. Our anniversary, his birthday, even my name. Nothing. But then I remembered the number he always used for everything, his go-to, the street he grew up on, mashed with his favorite sports team. I held my breath as I typed it in. The screen blinked, then unlocked. Just like that. I felt cold all over, like I'd opened a door that wasn't meant for me but somehow already belonged to me. There were messages first, hundreds, most of them short, affectionate, scattered with hearts and pet names I didn't recognize. Can't wait to see you tonight. I miss your smile. He has your eyes. I froze. He? My stomach clenched before my brain caught up. I opened the photo gallery. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. And there they were. Pictures. Of Noah. With another woman. And a little boy. They looked happy. Comfortable. There were birthday candles and trips to the zoo. Her head on his shoulder. The boy sitting on his lap. And the timestamps? That's what broke me. They weren't from years ago. They weren't from before us. They were recent. Some of them overlapped with weekends when Noah told me he was traveling for work. I'd packed his bags. I'd kissed him goodbye at the door. And the whole time, he'd been building a life with someone else. I wanted to scream, but the room was silent. I stared at those faces. Strangers who somehow shared pieces of the man I thought I knew. My hands went numb. I don't even remember putting the phone down. Everything felt disjointed, like I was floating above my body, watching it all happen to someone else. And then a question lodged itself deep in my chest, a question I couldn't unthink. If he doesn't remember any of this, does that make him innocent? I didn't sleep that night. I just sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the second phone like it might suddenly offer me an explanation. Like maybe, if I scrolled far enough, I'd find some message that made it all make sense. But there was nothing. No apology, no excuse. Just photos of a life I was never part of. I kept glancing at Noah, asleep beside me. Peaceful, innocent, like a man without history. And I guess, technically, he was. The irony crushed me. I'd been spending all this time trying to help him remember, guiding him back to our life, our memories, our love. But now I wasn't sure what I was really bringing him back to. Who was I reintroducing him to? A devoted husband? A liar? A man who had compartmentalized two lives so well that neither one knew about the other? And here I was, trying to piece things together while pretending everything was fine. I started hiding things, not because I wanted to deceive him, at least that's what I told myself, but because I didn't know what the truth would do to either of us. I backed up everything from the second phone onto a flash drive and buried it in the bottom of a box in the closet. Then I wiped the phone clean. Every text, every photo, every trace of her, of the child, of that entire shadow life he used to live. And still, I kept the phone. I couldn't let it go. I wish I could say I made those choices out of strength or clarity, but the truth is, I felt like I was balancing on the edge of something I didn't understand yet. I wasn't ready to confront him. Not yet. Not until I knew more. Because somewhere inside me, under all the hurt and anger, a darker question had started to bloom. What if I could rewrite everything? What if I could make him into the man I thought he was all along? The more I looked, the more I found. Receipts from cities we'd never visited together. Hotel confirmations under fake names. Flight bookings that didn't match the calendar he used to share with me. I don't know what I was expecting. A few flings? A single, messy mistake? But this wasn't that. This was deliberate. Patterned. Years of deception with carefully laid tracks. And somehow I'd missed it. I'd lived alongside it. I had loved inside it. Her name was Natalie. She was beautiful, not in an intimidating way, but soft, earthy, maternal. The kind of woman who bakes bread from scratch and keeps lavender by her windowsill. In some of the photos, she wore the necklace I once gave Noah for our 5th anniversary. That hurt in a way I didn't know how to explain. Not because of the gift, but because he'd shared pieces of our life with someone else, like he'd divided himself in half and handed us each a side. The boy? He looked just like Noah. That alone should have been enough to break me. And maybe it did, in a way. But I didn't scream. I didn't collapse. I just sat at our kitchen table, staring at the screen, breathing as quietly as I could. My world didn't fall apart in one big explosion. It came undone in stillness, in the sound of the fridge humming, the slow tick of the clock, the weight of that photo in my palm. This wasn't just infidelity. This was another life. And he didn't even know. That's what twisted the knife. Every time Noah looked at me now, it was with fresh eyes, grateful, gentle, full of trust. He relied on me for everything. I was the one telling him who he used to be, feeding him stories about our shared life. And I realized something terrifying, something empowering. He would believe whatever I told him. His memory was gone. His past was mine to narrate. And suddenly, I wasn't just his wife. I was the author of his identity. I stood in front of him the next morning with a smile I didn't feel and hands that wouldn't stop shaking. He was sipping coffee, the way he always used to. 2 sugars, no cream. Except I hadn't told him how he liked it. He'd just done it. Muscle memory, maybe. A part of the old Noah lingering inside the new one. And for a second, I hesitated. I almost told him. Almost opened my mouth and said, "There's something you need to know." But I didn't. Instead, I asked if he remembered our honeymoon. The one we took in the mountains, with the broken heater and the bottle of cheap red wine. He smiled, like he could see it. I watched the lines around his eyes crinkle with a kind of warm confusion. "I think so," he said softly. "That sounds right." And just like that, it became real. I told him about our late-night card games and the snowball fight we had in our pajamas. None of it happened, but it didn't matter. He believed me. That was the first time I rewrote something. A small thing. Harmless. But once I started, it got easier. I began weaving new memories. Safe ones, clean ones. A version of our life without lies, without Natalie, without a child he never told me about. I deleted the rest, wiped the second phone, sold it to a pawn shop an hour outside the city. I even paid someone to reroute any texts or calls from that number to a disconnected line. If the past came knocking, it wouldn't find him. At night, I would lie next to him and wonder if I was doing the right thing. But then he'd touch my hand or say something sweet, something I'd always wished he would have said before. He was more attentive now, softer. It was like the accident had stripped away all the pieces I'd once begged him to fix. And maybe that's why I kept going. Maybe it wasn't just about protecting him. Maybe I wanted to protect this version of him, the version who chose me without the lies. It didn't feel like lying. Not exactly. It felt like pruning a garden, cutting away the rotten parts, shaping what was left into something beautiful, something worth saving. I told him about our favorite hiking trail, even though we'd never been hiking a day in our lives. I showed him pictures I'd photoshopped, him and me in places we never visited. He laughed at the memories like they were his. Maybe they were becoming his. That's the thing about stories. Tell them enough times they become true. I found myself watching him when he wasn't looking, searching for signs. Guilt, regret, recognition. But there was nothing. Just this new version of him. Soft-spoken, present, kind. He started doing things he never used to do. Cooking dinner, leaving me little notes, saying I love you without prompting. I told myself it was part of the process, healing, reconnection. But somewhere I knew better. I hadn't just found a new man. I had made one. And with every day that passed, it got harder to remember where the truth ended and my version began. He looked at me like I was his whole world. He thanked me, again and again, for staying by his side, for helping him through the darkness. He said I was his miracle, and I smiled, even when it made my chest ache. Because part of me still wondered, if he ever remembered, if the pieces ever fell back into place, what would he think of the woman I'd become? But until that day came, if it ever came, I had a decision to make. Not just about him, about us. About what kind of life I was willing to live, and what kind of truth I was willing to bury. Because love isn't always clean. Sometimes it's a choice you make in the shadows. And I had just made mine. The first time he called me his everything, I almost cried. Not because of the words, but because of the way he said them. Like he meant it. Like he'd always meant it. I had to step out of the room to breathe. He didn't remember the years he spent hiding texts, deleting calls, inventing business trips. He didn't remember Natalie. Or the child. All of that was gone. In its place, there was me. Just me. And the version of him I'd carefully, quietly rebuilt. There was a rhythm now. A routine, like the one we used to have, but softer, better. He started making playlists for me, lighting candles at dinner, surprising me with flowers from the corner market. This was a man I had begged for, silently, for years. And now, somehow, I'd conjured him from memory and imagination. I told myself it wasn't manipulation. I told myself I was healing both of us. But late at night, when everything was still, I could feel the weight of the truth pressing against my ribs. I erased Natalie the way you erase an old file, slowly, thoroughly, until nothing recognizable remained. Sold the second phone, deleted old email accounts, paid a friend of a friend to intercept any contact attempts and route them into silence. There were no more cracks in the story I'd written, nothing left to bleed through, and with each day, Noah stepped deeper into the life I gave him, like a man walking through a door and forgetting to look back. One afternoon, he pulled out a little box, silver square with velvet inside. My heart stopped. I know we're married, he said, but I want to ask you again, as the man I am now. He dropped to one knee in the middle of our living room, barefoot, still smelling like coffee and shaving cream. I said yes before I even thought about it, because in that moment, I didn't feel like a liar. I felt like a woman being chosen. Again. The vow renewal was small, just a few close friends, a backyard strung with lights, and the smell of rain in the air. I wore a pale blue dress instead of white. He wore a navy suit that still had the tailor's tag tucked inside. As we stood under the arbor, hands clasped, I felt this quiet buzzing beneath my skin. Like I was living inside a dream I wasn't sure I deserved. He said the vows slowly, deliberately, eyes locked on mine. I repeated them with a trembling voice. Every word felt borrowed and real all at once. Friends came up to me afterward, hugging me tight, whispering how different he seemed. "It's like he's finally here," one said, really present. I just smiled, nodding like it hadn't taken weeks of gentle nudging, carefully planted stories, and strategically timed photos to guide him into this version of himself. I watched him laugh with my brother, hug my aunt, kiss my shoulder when he thought no one was looking. It was everything I used to wish for. So why did I still feel like I was holding my breath? Somewhere deep inside, I kept waiting for something to slip. A name spoken in his sleep. A sudden flash of memory. A photo he couldn't explain, but it never came. If there were fragments of his past left, they stayed buried, and I started to believe maybe that was okay. Maybe some lives are better left unrecovered. Maybe this was a second chance, not a lie. After all, what is love, if not a little bit of faith stitched over time? At night, he'd fall asleep with his arm draped over me, fingers tangled in mine like he was afraid to let go. And I'd lie there in the dark, listening to his breath, telling myself that this version, this man who showed up, who chose me, who remembered only the best of us, was worth the silence I was keeping. Because the truth, it was messy, unkind. And this life we had now, this careful, fragile, beautiful life, didn't have room for it. We started going on little trips together, weekend getaways, old towns with antique stores and bakeries that smelled like cinnamon. He'd hold my hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. Sometimes he'd say, "This place feels familiar," and I'd smile and agree, even if we'd never set foot there before. I learned how to steer conversations gently, to keep the past in soft focus. I told stories that couldn't be verified, painted memories on a canvas only I remembered. People kept saying how much he'd changed. Kinder, more grounded. One of our friends joked that maybe the accident had knocked the best version of him loose. I laughed too loud, then excused myself to the kitchen, because they weren't wrong. He was different, more patient, more affectionate. He listened. He noticed things, and I hated how much I loved it. How easy it became to pretend that this was always who he'd been. He began writing, short journal entries, thoughts, little details from the day. At first, I didn't think much of it, until I realized he was trying to trace his own identity. Rebuilding it, not from what I told him, but from what he felt. I should have encouraged it. I didn't. I started reading them when he wasn't looking for cracks, looking for Natalie's name, for the child. But there was nothing. Only me. Page after page. Only me. Still, I started dreaming of her again. Not as a person, but as a shadow at the edge of my vision. As if part of me knew, the past doesn't disappear. You can hide it, bury it, rewrite it, but it waits. And sometimes it finds its way to the surface, not as a memory, but as a consequence. The letter arrived on a Monday morning, folded neatly into a cream envelope. No return address. It sat in the mailbox like any other piece of mail. Innocent, unassuming. I didn't open it right away. I just stood there, barefoot on the porch, sun warming my shoulders, coffee cooling in my hand. Something about the weight of it felt wrong. Heavy in a way paper shouldn't be. When I finally opened it, I didn't recognize the handwriting, but I knew who it was from before I read the first line. Natalie. Her name didn't even need to be written. I felt it in my bones. The tone was calm, steady, almost kind. "I'm not here to take him back," she wrote. "I just think you should know the truth." My hands started shaking. She said he was going to leave me, that the divorce papers were already filed, that he had chosen her, that the child, his child, knew him, loved him, waited for him. And then, the final line, "I'm not angry. I just needed you to know what he gave up." I read it 3 times, then folded it in half, sharp and careful, like I was tucking it back into silence. My heart didn't race. I didn't cry. There was a strange stillness in me, like my body already knew what my mind hadn't caught up with. This wasn't new information, not really. I'd already seen the photos, read the messages, lived through the unraveling. This was just the echo, the last breath of a truth I had buried. I walked to the balcony, letter in hand, and struck a match. Watched the edges curl, blacken, turn to ash that danced up into the blue morning sky. I didn't flinch, didn't look over my shoulder. But as I turned back toward the door, I saw him, Noah, standing there. Eyes low, face unreadable. He had seen the letter, maybe even read it. And in the silence between us, one question landed like a stone between ribs. "Claire, did you know all this already?" I didn't answer right away, just met his eyes and held them, steady and soft, like I was offering my hands instead of words. There was so much I could have said, how I found the phone, the photos, the child. How I sat in the dark for nights, wondering what to do. How I chose us, even when it meant choosing a lie. But none of that would change the question between us. So I smiled. Small, honest in its own way. And I said, "Would it have changed how you love me now?" His face didn't shift. Not right away. He just stood there, like he was balancing on the edge of something too sharp to name. And I could see it, the thoughts flickering behind his eyes, the puzzle he didn't know he was missing now sliding into place. His posture changed. A breath pulled longer than usual. His voice, when it came, was quiet. "You decided who I am." It wasn't a question. It wasn't angry. Just a fact. And he wasn't wrong. I had decided. Piece by piece. Story by story. I had taken a shattered man and rebuilt him with only the parts I could live with. I told myself it was mercy. That I was giving him the chance to become the man he should have been all along. But in that moment, hearing it from his lips, I felt something buckle inside me. Because the truth is, I didn't just rewrite him. I rewrote me too. The woman who forgave. The woman who chose. He didn't yell. He didn't leave. He just stepped back, slow and quiet, like someone walking out of a room they weren't sure they were ever supposed to be in. And I stood there, barefoot on the wood floor, heart pounding, wondering what kind of silence comes after a truth like that. Not the kind that waits for an apology, but the kind that changes the air around you. I stood alone in the hallway for a long time after he left the room, listening for footsteps, for a door closing, for something to break. But all I heard was the low hum of the house settling into silence. I didn't follow him. I didn't explain. There was nothing left to defend. The truth had already done what it came to do, not explode, but dissolve, slow and clean, like sugar in hot water. He knew. And somehow, that felt like the end of something I'd never really started. Later, I walked into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. Everything looked the same. The soft sheets, the slippers beside his nightstand, the photo of us on the wall smiling like we meant it. I reached under the mattress and pulled out a small box, dusty, unopened, for months. Inside were photos, not of him, of me, with someone else. Someone who once touched my wrist like it was something sacred. Someone who whispered promises I never told Noah about. Funny, isn't it? He lived a double life and I made myself the better version. But I had secrets too, carefully folded into corners, never spoken aloud. Maybe we both did what we had to do. Maybe survival looks different for everyone. Love, grief, reinvention. We don't always know which one we're living until it's already behind us. I tucked the box back where it belonged, not because I was ashamed, but because some truths are better off held in silence. And as I turned out the light, I heard his voice from the other room. Not loud, just a quiet, broken call. Claire? I didn't answer right away. I just sat there in the dark, heart steady, hands in my lap, letting the moment stretch. Then I stood, walked to the door, and opened it. Not because I owed him anything, but because I wanted to. Because maybe we were both living with ghosts. And maybe I was ready to haunt him back.